Jack has complicated feelings towards Leona. We learn that Leona is the reason that Jack enrolled at NRC in the first place, after seeing him play in a spell drive tournament and hoping to play alongside him one day. Jack may have built up an image in his head of the kind of person he thought that Leona was, only to disappoint himself when Leona failed to live up to the expectations that Jack had been projecting onto him. In one of their earliest interactions we see Leona interrupting a spell drive practice where Jack is trying to force the team to play strictly by the rules, saying, "I don't care if you're older than me. I'm not taking orders from guys who can't even play on my level." The practice threatens to devolve into a fight and so Leona intervenes, pointing out to Jack that skirting the rules is different from breaking the rules, and is a legitimate tactic for the older students to take, while Jack himself is being disruptive. Leona sends Jack to warm the bench, but when Jack is out of earshot Leona reprimands the older students for playing alpha, saying that it's embarrassing to watch them get all huffy just because Jack keeps beating them at the game. Leona and Ruggie overhear those same older students plotting to gather a group to beat up Jack and take him down a peg, but Ruggie says that Jack's attitude isn't helping, since not everything can be categorized as right or wrong. Ruggie even says, it probably wouldn't hurt to let them put a little fear into Jack and teach him to respect the rest of his dorm, insinuating that they should let Jack get jumped by the older students to teach him his place. The upperclassmen call Jack out to talk alone, but bring almost 30 other students with them to try to intimidate Jack into never playing Spell Drive for Savannah Claw again. Jack defends himself physically during the ensuing brawl but either can't or won't use magic, even after the older students do. Leona intervenes on Jack's behalf, but the older students insist they were doing as Leona said and teaching him how to play smart. Leona calls them out on not having what it takes to lead a pack for using magic in a brawl, and the older students turn on him. Jack tries to get Leona to stand down rather than risk himself on Jack's behalf, but Leona tells him to get back, saying, 30 mice still aren't a match for one lion. He proceeds to deflect every shot that is cast at him, and begins to summon his unique magic to turn the earth to sand beneath their feet. He is stopped mid-spell by Ruggie after the older students pass out from sheer terror. Jack expresses confusion as to why Leona came to his aid at all, and Leona explains that while Jack is a brat who doesn't follow orders, he is not so thick as to fail to learn something from this. At least, I hope not. Jack apologizes and thanks Leona for his help, saying that he has learned that they have one incredible house warden. Leona assures him that guys who own up to their mistakes are all right in my book, and Jack says, House Warden Leona, he's the real deal after all. I knew he wouldn't let me down. One day, I want to fight him at his strongest. Despite this initial admiration, Jack calls Leona and Ruggie playing a mock spelldrive match against Cater, Ace, Deuce, Grim and the player a disgusting spectacle. When another student asks if Jack realizes he's talking to his own house warden, Jack responds, if you're gonna play the upperclassman card, you ought to act the part, rather than argue or insult him in return. However, Leona says that Jack is pretty bold, and I guess I can respect that. On the subject of Jack in Book 6 Leona says, Jack's pretty self-aware. He can get a little prideful, but he knows he's not boss material yet. So he always follows the boss orders when push comes to shove. He's a good little pupper like that. Leona volunteers Jack for Fairy Gala remix and Jack initially refuses, telling Leona that it is ridiculous that he thinks he can volunteer him for an important job without asking first. Leona convinces him that the mission needs someone who can lead the pack, someone with solid judgment and initiative. I figured you had both of those things. There are a lot of students in Savannah Claw, but I picked you. Leona proceeds to pretend he will pick another Savannah Claw first year, and Jack says I'll get the job done, and later, you can count on me. Leona is unimpressed when Jack compromises the plan by sneezing. At the end of the event Jack says, Leona will never let me hear the end of this. He might not even let me into Savannah Claw right now, and even if he doesn't say anything, I'm so ashamed of myself that I'm not gonna be able to look him in the eye. Jack's main issue with Leona seems to come from how he has incredible talent, but refuses to even use it, saying that he despises people like Leona who possess power that they do not hone. Jack seems to be assuming that Leona has not honed his powers, rather than assuming there may be more going on in Leona's life than he is aware of. Another source of frustration for Jack seems to be how he does not understand why Leona is the way he is, as Leona does not confide in him, or possibly anybody, even though this means being insulted by people like Jack who choose to assume the worst about him. Jack even asks Leona outright, "What happened to the man you used to be?" feeling betrayed for Leona not living up to Jack's expectations, despite how Jack's only pre-NRC exposure to Leona had been televised spell drive matches. Leona acknowledges this with, "Your dreams got nothing to do with me." Despite Jack's questionable allegiance in Book 2, and Leona outright calls him a filthy traitor, Leona seems to have fewer issues with Jack than Jack has with him. When Ruggie asks if he should take down Jack for meddling in their affairs, Leona does not let him, and he is regularly looking out for Jack, supporting him during Halloween both by providing him with refreshments, though he downplays his role and says dismissively that it is a boss's job to keep his pack's morale high, and making sure the other Savannah Claw students recognize Jack as an authority figure during the event. Ruggie comments, "Can't you just admit you want to do something nice?" Leona also downplays his concern for Jack during Spectral Soiree, though Ruggie calls him out on it with, "Would it kill you to be honest with the guy and tell him you were worried?" When Jack tries to come up with ideas for chasing off the Magic monsters during Halloween, both Ruggie and Leona are unimpressed with his plan, which is, to yell really loudly at them. Jack asks Leona what he should do and Leona tells him to figure it out for himself, as the leader. Jack goes to Deuce, who recommends conferring with Trey, as Heart's Lobule dressed up as pirates the year before. Jack is reluctant to go to another dorm for help but ultimately concedes, receiving a food-based lecture from Trey that inspires him to come up with a more effective plan. When the plan is put into action, Savannah Claw's students naturally go to Leona for instructions, but he tells them he is not the one in command today, telling Jack, "Show us what you've got." Jack's idea is a success and Leona congratulates him on the decent display. Leona invites Jack to his hometown in the Cloud Calling event to participate in a tournament. Under the influence of Fellows Magic, Leona reluctantly agrees to visit Playful Land with the group. Jack seems excited, but Leona says, "Don't get me wrong. I'm going to be your chaperone." During Book 2, Leona's issue with Jack does not come from Jack talking like he's better than Leona, as is written in his EN dialogue. This is a line that Leona has never actually said. The original line was, "He sounds just like my brother." Jack has a chat line about the King of Beasts being protective and good with kids, saying they don't make kings like that every day, and possible insinuating that Leona might actually be meeting Jack's inflated expectations for him, but Jack doesn't know him well enough to realize it. During the New Year's event, Sebek and Vil insist on Leona participating in a game and Leona refuses outright due to lack of interest, preferring to simply return to the dorm. When Jack asks him to participate, Leona acquiesces. Leona seems to regard Jack with what is possibly exasperated fondness, but even post-Book 2 Jack hasn't any deeper understanding of Leona, and continues to struggle with his regard for him. He comments again in Book 4 on Leona being good enough to do anything when he applies himself, so why doesn't he? And reacts with surprise when he learns that Leona skips out on his PE classes despite being good at athletics. When Ruggie recommends that Jack serve Leona as someone Jack admires, Jack says, "I'm not sure I'd say I admire him. I do want to surpass Leona one day." Jack will also occasionally badmouth Leona behind his back, comparing him unfavorably to Riddle by calling him a coward, scared of putting in some effort to get ahead, lazy and irritable. While comfortable complaining about Leona when Leona cannot hear him, Jack does not seem to like it when others do so. During Port Fest, he promises not to make Leona look bad with his performance. When an attendee falsely accuses Ruggie and himself of stealing his wallet, Jack does not react, ignoring Ruggie's claims of innocence and even searching him for the missing wallet, but when the man accuses Leona he becomes defensive, with Leona having to tell him to put his fangs away. Jack expresses gratitude for a birthday present of roast beef from Leona, and Leona says that Jack brought him an extra-large slab of meat for his birthday, and, "The guy knows what I like." Despite Jack's internal conflict, he has surprisingly little issue with following Leona's orders day to day, and when Vil tries to blame Leona for Jack's inability to wear his ceremonial robes correctly, Jack says that Leona has nothing to do with it. Jack also tries to stop Azul from charging the cleaning expenses resulting from a bottle that Jack breaks to Leona. Jack going to Leona for advice is a major plot point in Port Fest. Jack initially consults with Rook, but it becomes apparent to Rook very quickly that Jack is not going to listen to any of his advice. Rook encourages Jack to go to someone else for help, someone whom he looks up to with his whole heart, who he sees as a true leader. Jack goes to Leona. Leona is not amused by Jack and Ruggy being the source of the entire Port Fest situation, but Jack insists that he is going to perform even if he has to do it alone, promising that he won't make Leona look bad. Leona tells him he is being reckless, and he should reevaluate what his goal really is, not just blindly follow Crowley's orders. Jack confides in Ruggy that he went to Leona for help, and the two try to imagine performing specifically for Leona rather than the festival attendees, but no matter what they come up with, they can foresee Leona being most displeased. Jack figures out a solution in time and thanks Leona for helping him find his prey. Leona says he didn't do anything but will be attending the performance, and Jack thanks him again. Leona praises Jack for holding his interest throughout the performance, and Jack is rendered momentarily speechless before thanking him for the compliment. Jack has a voice line of, "I'm always impressed when I see Leona leading my dorm mates. I gotta catch up to him, quick." During Vargas camp, Leona teaches a group of students about how to find mage stones, and Deuce is openly impressed, telling Jack that his house warden is amazing. Jack reluctantly agrees, saying Leona being amazing is no surprise, but he was surprised that Leona not only volunteered the information but walked them all through it, as he didn't think Leona had it in him. In the end, Jack says, "I can definitely look up to a guy like Leona."